Hello. After making 3 preliminary videos, I'm very happy to be finally starting my playthrough of Supply Lines of the American Revolution, the Northern Theater by Hollandspiele Games. And if you're not familiar with the game, you should definitely watch those 3 videos before you start watching this, because I'm not going to pause to explain the things that I explain in my preliminary videos, but there's still a lot left to explain, and those items I will explain as I go. So without further ado, let's just launch into the sequence of play. And again, I will explain things as I go. First thing we always want to do is check whether it's a winter turn or not. And we see that on the game record track. This turn is not a winter turn. Those are depicted by these 2 locations on the game record track. Maybe I should already be zooming in. So hopefully you can see my oversized cursor, and we're not in a winter turn. More on winter turns when one happens. The next step is to generate supplies except in a winter turn. So I'll explain the process of generating supplies, and it's going to be a little bit tedious. This is the only video where I will actually show on the video the generation of supplies. For all subsequent videos, I will do that before I start the video. My plan is to have 1 video per turn, or so whenever it is I'm starting a new turn and starting a new video, I will generate the supplies before I start the video, so you don't have to sit through that. So anyways, the rule for generating supplies is that every city space, so not forts, not points, but just cities, every city space that is occupied by an army, and remember, an army is just 1 or more strength points, with or without a leader, so a stack. Every city with an army that is that is connected to a point space, so like this one, that is either empty or occupied by an army of the same side as the army that's occupying the city space in question, generates supplies. So, for instance, Quebec will generate supplies because A, it's occupied by an army, and B, it's connected to a point space that is either empty, here it's empty, or occupied by an army by a British army. If it were occupied by an American army, 1 or more units of American forces, then Quebec would not generate then Quebec would not generate supplies. And when a city generates supplies, it generates 2 food cubes, 2 green cubes, and 1 yellow or war cube or war supply. And I'm just going to do this as quickly as I can. So 2 green, trying to get a yellow one there. And same goes for Montreal. Boy, I'm not grabbing these cubes very well. Oh, there we go. Did I maybe... Let's see. Cambridge will generate supplies in virtue of bordering either of these 2 points. Only takes 1 point. Come on. As does Boston, in virtue of being connected to this empty point. That is going to be a major headache for Boston in the next few turns. But this turn, it does, oh boy, I've never had this problem before. Albany generates supplies. Oh, I know what's happening. I have to click in the window before I can grab a cube. Got it. And Providence will generate supplies. New York will generate supplies. And that's it. Notice that several forts started with some war supplies. So we've generated supplies. The next step in the sequence of play is that each player, starting with the Crown, the British, can move supplies through overland supply lines. Well, there are no overland supply lines right now at the moment. So, for instance, there isn't a supply line between Quebec and Montreal because this intervening or intermediate point space is not occupied by a Crown army. It's empty, so there is no supply line connecting Quebec with Montreal. And the only supply line on the board, well, there's one supply line on the board, I misspoke, between Cambridge and this point. So if I wanted to, deciding this as the Patriot player, I could move supplies from Cambridge to this army here. But I'm not going to do that, so we will just go to the next step in the sequence. The Crown player can move supplies, not armies, just supplies, from exactly one Crown-occupied port to exactly one Crown-occupied port, or the at-sea box. The at-sea box is down here. And there are some restrictions on that. One is that supplies can never be moved from Quebec to another port. So Quebec is has that as a special feature. You can move armies from. You can do naval transport for units for armies as normal from Quebec, but not supplies. Supplies. So you can never move supplies from Quebec to another port. The second restriction is that the only port from which supplies can be moved to Quebec is Nova Scotia. More on generating supplies in Nova Scotia later. Supplies can only be moved out of Nova Scotia, not into. So I could not move supplies, say, from Boston to Nova Scotia. And those are the three restrictions. I am not, as the Crown player, I really... the movement of... And remember that the movement of supplies has to be from one Crown-occupied port to another Crown-occupied port. So I couldn't move supplies, say, from Boston to Stonington in anticipation of a naval transport later from, say, Boston or Quebec to Stonington. And that's important because when you do a naval transport of units in this game, you are not allowed to move supplies along with the units. The units are transported through naval transport without carrying supplies along with them. So we are, as a Crown, we're not going to move supplies from one Crown-occupied port to another. And then the last, we're doing the supply phase here, and the last step in the supply phase is that the Crown player can move the next eligible token from the Crown reinforcement tracker to Nova Scotia. And I'm going to do that. What that means is you start with the one that's labeled 1 or first, and you just move it up to Nova Scotia. What that means is that in the second turn, in the supply phase, the first thing we'll do is that 6 units of reinforcement will appear in Nova Scotia in virtue of this one counter being in Nova Scotia. Remember, this is not a unit. This is a Crown reinforcement track counter. And also that will mean that 1 cube of supplies will also be generated in Nova Scotia that then I can use naval transport to move from Nova Scotia to a Crown-occupied port. However, this will come at a cost. Now my required minimum number of victory cities to hold at the end of the game for a crown victory just went up from 2 to 3. And very importantly, whenever I move a marker from the crowd reinforcement track to Nova Scotia, the all-important Patriot support track marker moves 1 to the right. So I've now done that. And we advance to the initiative phase. So this is so the way the initiative phase works is that each side rolls 1 die. The number on the highest of the 2 die will determine the starting location of the pass track marker, and then the side that rolled the highest die will get the first impulse. So let's roll a 2d6. And the American roll will be on the left, and the British roll will be on the right. So Americans rolled a 1, the British rolled a 3. Very interesting. That's an unlikely outcome. There's a 2/3 chance that the pass track marker will start in the 5 to 6 slot. And now we start with the impulse phase, and the British get the first impulse. So this is a atypical result. Let me get things centered here. And as I discussed in my previous video, the problem that the British player faces is that it's possible for the American player to get 2 more strength points and a leader into Cambridge, and then if it can get supply into Cambridge as well, it can attack Boston, defeat the army in Boston, and at minimum keep advancing the support tracker 1 to the right, which the British want to try to stop at all costs. And this pass track result is very favorable to the British. And the reason why is that if they just pass, so if they start by passing and then pass the next 2 turns, that means the Americans only get 2 turns, and the Americans cannot possibly attack Boston in 2 turns because it'll take 1 turn to get a leader into Cambridge. Of course, they'll do it along with these 2 strength points, but it will take another turn to get enough supply into Cambridge so that they can attack Boston. And the reason for that is that when you attack a city, it costs, well, whenever you attack, you have to invest or spend enough war supply cubes to buy at least 1 battle die. And when you attack a city, it costs 2 war supplies to buy the first battle die. So the Patriot player, in order to attack Boston from Cambridge, has to get a second white or yellow supply cube into Cambridge so that it can pay for the minimum of 1 battle die that's required to attack Boston. And then, of course, it would take another turn to actually do the attack. So that's a total of 3 turns. And so the question I have to ask myself as the British player, and it's my impulse, it's the British player's impulse, do I want to do that? Do I just want to essentially burn the first turn and not give the Patriots a chance to attack my army in Boston in the first turn? This has happened rarely enough in my solo plays of this game that I don't have a lot of experience thinking about this situation. In the interest of just moving things along and just making quick decisions, my instinct is that in this first turn, if the Patriots can't move their support marker 1 to the right, that's a victory for me as the British player. So I am indeed going to I'm going to pass and now move the pass track 1 to the left. So now it's the American player's impulse. So I need to think, as the American player, what do I want to do in these circumstances. I think what I want to do is do everything I can to make sure that I get at least one attack off in against Boston in the subsequent turn. Well, the main thing I want to do is I want to make sure that as the American player that the turn ends with an American unit in this point, because if it does, then Boston will not be able to generate additional supplies in the next turn. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take care of that. Is I'm going to first I need to make change. So now I've got 2 1s in Providence, and I'm going to spend 1 food supply. That allows me to move up to 4 strength points, but I'm not going to move both. I'm going to just move 1 into this point. Now I've got a supply line stretching from Boston to Cambridge and actually all the way to this army. So now I'm going to take advantage of that supply line. Remember that during an impulse, the phasing player can move supplies along its supply lines as it chooses. The only restriction is it has to respect the limits on each space. So I'm definitely going to move the war supply to Cambridge. Do I want to move the food supply as well? It's very likely I'm going to be able to. I mean, it's all but certain that I, as the Patriot player, will generate supplies in Cambridge in the next turn. So that's going to give me 2 more greens and 1 more yellow, which will put me at 7 of 8. So I'm just going to leave the other green cube here in Providence for now. So now that's my phase, that's my impulse as the American player. Now it's the British player's impulse. I do have the option, of course, of attacking this point from Boston. Spending, that would cost me my 1 war cube here. But then I wouldn't be able to pass. That would leave 2 turns. Excuse me. And then if I did that, that would leave the American player with enough remaining turns to attack me. I say that. Yes, because I could get this army into here on 1 turn. Whoops. And then on the remaining turn I could attack. So as the British player, I'm going to stick to the plan and just move the past track 1. Now, so it's the American player's phase. Now the question is, what do I want to do? I've got 2 options. One is I can create a supply line. This is very likely, as the American player, I should be thinking, this is very likely my last turn my last impulse this turn. So I do want to prioritize getting an army into Cambridge or moving a unit here and building a supply line from Albany to Cambridge and moving supplies into Cambridge. Well, I don't really need, it wouldn't be bad to get 1 more war supply in Cambridge. Here's the thing. What the British player is going to probably do on their next turn is, on their first impulse, they're either going to take armies from Quebec or from Nova Scotia, put them in the C box, so that on the next British player's impulse, they could move them into Boston, dramatically increase the number of troops in Boston, making it very difficult for me, a lot more difficult for me, to defeat them in a battle in Boston. So I probably want to prioritize as the American player, making sure that I'm able to attack Boston at least once in the next turn. So with that in mind, I'm going to take my one cube in Providence, move it along the supply line to this point. So now it's being carried by this army. I'm going to spend it to activate this stack, this army, and I'm going to move it into Cambridge. Now I'm forestalling a supply line for the moment from Albany into Cambridge, but I think I always want to remember as the American player, my goal is to move that support marker. So all my actions should be dictated by this. And if I'm moving my support marker, then I'm making progress and I'm on track to victory regardless of what else is going on the board. So that's my move as the American player. Now it's the British player's turn. Has anything substantially changed as the British player? No. Again, I could attack the point it would be to try to like open up the point so I can generate supplies in Boston, but then I would be leaving myself open to an attack either in the point or in Boston by the army in Cambridge, and that would move the support marker. So I'm just going to move the pass marker to 0, and that is the end of the impulse phase. So the remaining steps is to go through the turn end phase. First, the crown player checks for victory. The crown, well, we check for victory, and neither side is victorious at this point. Remove all dug-in markers. No armies dug in. No armies did a dig-in action or dug-in action, so there's no markers to remove. In a winter turn, the Continental Army disbands. It wasn't a winter turn. And Patriot reinforcements are mustered. So here's the reinforcement process. The way it's in the physical copy of the game, you just have a bunch of chits with city names on them. You draw chits as the Patriot player, and if the city chit is either unoccupied or occupied by the Americans, then you put 2 American units in the city. If the city is occupied by the British, then you don't put any units in the city. In the vassal module here, you just draw at random. It says Stonington on top, but you really are just drawing it at random. So, and the number of chits we draw is determined by the position of the support marker on the Patriot support track. We're in the 3 area here. So for reinforcement, we're going to draw 3 of these chits. So 1, 2, 3. And that is a bad roll for the British. Wow. Because we drew 2 Cambridge chits, so that means 4 strength points are going to go into 4 more strength points are going to go into Cambridge. So we will just put them there. I won't bother cleaning up now. And then additionally 2 more go into Stonington. Wow. That is the end of the reinforcement phase. And then as the last thing we'll do, we'll advance the game turn marker to here. And that's the end of turn 1. So I'm going to stop the video. And the next video, we will start all over again with turn 2.